Welcome to the new part of lecture number 2 of General Science Class 7. Let's have a look on today's lecture outline. Today we are going to first revise a few concepts that we did earlier, and then we're going to start a new topic of typical animal cell and its organelles. Then we'll see what is actually the stark contrast between animal and a typical plant cell, and then we'll move on to cell division, and we'll give reference to mitosis that is required for growth, and another cell division kind, meiosis, which helps in reproduction and reproductive processes. So in revision, in the last lecture and their parts, we discussed cell, and we described it as it is actually a basic unit of life, functional unit of life. And then we said that cell can be seen under a microscope, and we discussed what actually are the basic components of a typical microscope, and that was given in your homework as home assignment. And then we discussed this, on the basis of whether the organisms made up of one cell or many cells, they are called unicellular and multicellular, and we gave different examples for each category. Then we discussed plant cell, how plant cell is actually performing different processes and different functions, because it has different specific organelles that have specific functions. Like the plant cells helps in photosynthesis. It provides ATP to other cells, and it is actually a source of oxygen because it carries out photosynthesis. And since it has this green coloring pigment, it has chloroplast, and we know that the plant cell is basically the one which has a strong cellulose cell wall that protects it from the outer surroundings. So these were the stark points or stark organelles responsible for specific functions in plant cell. Now moving on to the animal cell today, we are going to discuss its different organelles or parts, both are same. You say that different organelles, that means the components within the animal cell or within the plant cell. So a typical animal cell differs from plant cell in many ways. First, you see that there is no cell wall outside this cell membrane. The structure of the animal cell is drawn here. You will see that in the animal plant, you actually saw that in the animal cell there was an additional layer beyond this layer that supports the inner layer in the plant cell, and that was called cell wall, made up of cellulose, again carbohydrates, which was actually a carbohydrate. But in here there is no cell wall. So because of this absence of cell wall, there is only a single membrane that makes up the plant animal cell. It is actually a eukaryotic cell. What is eukaryotic cell? Eukaryotic cells are actually the ones who do not have cell wall, first. Second, that they have organelles which are membrane bounded. That is, inside the cell, whatever the different parts or different organelles are present, they all are actually membrane bounded. They are protected by some covering. Plus, they have a nucleus which is also membrane bounded. So we'll see in today's lecture that this nucleus, and this is the inside of the nucleus, and this is the boundary of the nucleus. This boundary of the nucleus is actually having a cell membrane. So the nucleus is protected in eukaryotic cell, and other organelles are protected by by membranes, and there is no cell wall. So we say that plant is actually a prokaryotic cell because it had cell wall, and because it has some specific shape because of the presence of the cell wall, because cell wall always gives a regular shape and we saw that plant cell is usually rectangular shape, whereas animal cell is usually, it can be any regular, it can be any shape. It is actually irregular shape because of the absence of cell wall. So deriving from this, we can say that the difference between animal and plant cell is that there is no cell wall in animal. All the organelles are actually membrane bounded, plus the nucleus of the animal cell is also membrane bounded. These three points are actually for any eukaryotic cell, whereas prokaryotic cell is actually the reverse of this. So plant cell is actually prokaryotic cell. Okay, so if you just another point that comprises in the difference between animal and plant cell is that in first we discussed this thing already, that it is irregular shape because there is no cell wall. Second, basic in the structure of the cell, another difference is that in animal cell there are no plastids, because animals are actually not autotrophs. So these two terms are new to you. Let's discuss them. What actually are the autotrophs? Autotrophs are the organisms that produce energy, that produce energy on their own by utilizing any abiotic source of energy. Let me simplify this. What does this whole process or this whole definition tells you? That in what autotrophs are is that they convert any source of energy, maybe light energy, or maybe any energy released from, or maybe energy released from any inorganic chemical reaction. You know, chemical reaction sometimes produces energy, though those are exothermic, and so those chemical reactions which absorb energy are endothermic. So we are talking about the energy provided to the autotrophs is actually abiotic nature, that is deriving from non-living sources. So what they do, they utilize that source of energy, abiotic source of energy, maybe light, or maybe any chemical reaction energy, and then they break down the carbon component. That is, it takes carbon dioxide, which is actually a carbon compound, within the presence of light. Carbon dioxide in the presence of light produces another carbon compound which is organic in nature and called glucose or carbohydrates. Plus they release large bulk of energy. So this happens in plant, we know this, and this phenomenon we are very familiar with it. It is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is actually the process in which plant cells takes any abiotic source of energy, light energy, or energy given out in any chemical reaction, inorganic chemical reaction. It uses the light source or light energy, and in the presence of carbon dioxide, which is inorganic compound, produces organic compound glucose or carbohydrate, which is actually the food for the plant itself. That is, it is making food for itself. Plus it also releases some energy. So the autotrophs actually are the producers in the food chain. Producers means they produce energy using abiotic sources of energy. So plants and algae are the basic example for autotrophs, since animals cannot produce cannot do this photosynthesis kind of reaction, or whatever or such reaction that happens in algae, because animal cells are not capable of photosynthesis to generate energy using light source. We never utilize light source or sun source of light, and never produce energy for ourselves, because we depend on external sources of food and external sources of energy from external environment. So we are actually not autotrophs. So plastids are actually the organelles that helps in this whole process. So animal cells are not actually autotrophs. They cannot produce energy from abiotic processes or from abiotic sources of energy. So we lack plastids. Whereas this happens in plants and algae. So plastids are present in in plant cells. So these three are the basic differences that you must remember. These differences should be on your fingertips between animal and plant cell.